The first alert pinged on Isabel Sterling's secure FAA comms unit just as she was drifting into that shallow pre-dawn sleep, the kind where the city's hum still murmured beneath the surface of her consciousness. It wasn't the blare of a full emergency, not yet, but a priority flag, an anomaly demanding immediate attention. She was FAA Regional Administrator, Southern Pacific Division. Anomalies were her bread and butter, though usually during daylight hours and involving air traffic control systems or runway incursions, not this. She fumbled for the device on her nightstand, the glow of the screen, stark in the darkened bedroom of her condominium. The Riverview Towers, a sleek high-rise in the heart of the city, was usually a sanctuary of quiet sophistication. The message scrolling across the screen, however, shattered that illusion with brutal efficiency. Life Flight 77 Kilo. Inbound MedStar General Rooftop Helipad, MSH1, ETA 0432, Zulu. Pilot reports visual obstruction on pad, requesting immediate verification and assistance. Critical medical transport. Isabel's blood ran cold. MedStar General's rooftop helipad, that was her building. Riverview Towers housed the helipad on its uppermost roof, a crucial city-designated emergency facility serving the sprawling MedStar General Hospital complex directly across the street. She knew its layout as well as her own apartment. Obstruction at 0430, Zulu. That was 9:30 p.m. local time, well into the evening. Unthinkable. Her training decades honed kicked in. Sleep vanished, replaced by a crystalline focus. She swung her legs out of bed, her voice already crisp and professional, as she activated the unit's microphone. FAA Command. This is Administrator Sterling. I have eyes on the Life Flight 77 Kilo advisory. MSH1 is my residential building. Stand by. I am proceeding to rooftop for immediate visual assessment. Patch me through to the pilot secure line. Roger that, Administrator Sterling. Patching you to 77 Kilo. Pilot is Captain Eva Rostova. The line clicked, and a woman's voice, strained but professional, filled Isabel's ear. FAA, this is Life Flight 77 Kilo. We are 5 miles out from MSH1 descending through 1000. We have a donor liver time critical. Visual on the pad shows. It looks like furniture planters. Definitely barricaded. We cannot land. Repeat, MSH1 is unusable. A donor liver. Every second counted. Furniture planters. A wave of incredulous fury washed over Isabel. This wasn't some accidental debris. This sounded deliberate, and she had a sickening suspicion who might be responsible. Captain Rostova, this is FAA Regional Administrator Isabel Sterling. I am on site at Riverview Towers and proceeding to the helipad now. Maintain your holding pattern if fuel allows, or advise if you need to divert to secondary. I will rectify this situation. What is your current fuel state and window for transplant viability? Administrator Sterling. Thank you. Rostova's relief was palpable, though still edged with urgency. We have approximately 20 minutes of loiter time before we hit minimums for diversion to City Executive, which is another 15 minutes out from MedStar. The Oregon procurement team says we're already pushing the ischemia time. Every minute is critical. 20 minutes to clear a barricaded rooftop helipad in the middle of the night with a life hanging in the balance. Isabel was already pulling on clothes, her mind racing through protocols, legal authorities, and the layout of the rooftop access points. This wasn't just an obstruction. This was potentially negligent homicide in the making. As she sprinted for the emergency stairwell, the elevators would be too slow. Her thoughts coalesced around Patricia Pat Dunnigan, the newly elected chair of the Riverview Towers Homeowners Association Safety and Serenity Committee. Dunnigan, a retired city clerk with an unyielding belief in rules order and absolute quiet after 9 p.m., had made it her personal crusade to curtail the disruptive late-night operations of the MedStar helipad. There had been increasingly strident emails, impassioned speeches at HOA meetings about noise pollution and resident tranquility, and even a recent dubiously passed bylaw attempting to impose a rooftop curfew from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. Isabel, along with MedStar Legal and several other concerned residents, had vehemently opposed the curfew, pointing out that federal aviation regulations and the city's agreement with the hospital for the helipad's 24/7 emergency operation superseded any HOA bylaw. Dunnigan had been dismissive, her face tightening with righteous indignation. "This is our home administrator, Sterling," she'd said at the last contentious meeting, her voice quivering with conviction. "And we have a right to peace and quiet. Your FAA regulations don't dictate how we manage our private property after hours." Private property. It was a common, dangerous misconception that HOAs often harbored about federally regulated airspace and critical infrastructure. Isabel had tried to explain patiently at first, then more forcefully, about preemption, about the non-negotiable nature of life-saving medical flights. Dunnigan had remained stubbornly unconvinced, her eyes gleaming with the fervor of a true believer. Now it seemed Patricia Dunnigan had escalated from rhetoric to reckless action. The heavy fire door to the rooftop access corridor slammed behind Isabel. The air up here was cooler, carrying the metallic tang of the city night and the distant rhythmic throb of Life Flight 77 kilos rotors as it circled overhead. The helipad itself, a large painted circle on the flat expanse of the main roof, was illuminated by perimeter lights, and what Isabel saw made her breath catch in her throat. It was exactly as Captain Rostova had described. Heavy cast-iron patio tables from the residents' communal rooftop lounge had been dragged across the landing zone. Large decorative terracotta planters, each weighing hundreds of pounds, were positioned to block key approach and departure paths. Yellow caution tape, incongruously festive, was strung between them, creating a makeshift but undeniably effective barricade. And standing in the middle of it all, arms crossed, a flashlight in one hand and a copy of the HOA bylaws clutched in the other like a shield, was Patricia Dunnigan. She wore a bright orange safety vest over her sensible cardigan, looking for all the world like a misplaced crossing guard, if crossing guards were empowered to obstruct federal aviation. Dunnigan Isabel's voice was sharp, cutting through the throb of the helicopter. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Patricia Dunnigan turned, her expression one of grim satisfaction. "Administrator Sterling, or should I say, Resident Sterling, you're violating the HOA's duly enacted quiet hours protocol for the rooftop amenity space. It's after 9:30 p.m. This area is closed." Isabel stared at her, momentarily speechless, at the woman's utter detachment from reality. "Closed? Dunnigan, there is a helicopter up there right now with a human liver for transplant, and it cannot land because you've turned this federally designated emergency helipad into a damned obstacle course. People's lives are at stake." Dunnigan sniffed, unmoved. "The bylaws are quite clear. Article 7, Section B. The rooftop terrace and helipad auxiliary area shall be closed to all resident and vehicular traffic, including aerial incursions between the hours of 2100 and 0700 to ensure resident peace and tranquility. That helicopter is causing a noise disturbance in violation of our community rules." She tapped the bylaws with a self-important finger. Isabel advanced her voice, dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Your community rules do not, and I repeat, do not supersede federal law and the critical operational requirements of an emergency medical facility. That pilot, Captain Rostova, has declared an emergency. You are right now, Patricia, committing a federal offense by interfering with air navigation and endangering human life. You need to help me clear this pad, immediately." Dunnigan stood her ground, her chin jutting out stubbornly. "I will not. I am upholding the democratically expressed will of the Riverview Towers residents. We are tired of these noisy helicopters disrupting our sleep. MedStar can use the airport like any other noisy aircraft. The airport is 20 minutes further from the operating room," Isabel exclaimed, her frustration mounting. "That liver won't survive the delay. People will die, Dunnigan, because of your petty power trip and your illegal curfew." Her comms unit crackled. "Administrator Sterling, this is 77 Kilo. We're down to 15 minutes of fuel before diversion is mandatory. What's the status?" Captain Rostova's voice was tight with controlled desperation. "Working on it," Captain Isabel bit out, never taking her eyes off Dunnigan. "Stand by." She turned back to the HOA official. "This is your last chance, Patricia. Either you help me move this junk, or I will have you forcibly removed and arrested. And I assure you, the full weight of the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Justice will come down on you and this HOA so hard, you'll wish you'd never heard the word bylaw." Dunnigan actually scoffed. "Threats, Ms. Sterling. Is that how the FAA handles legitimate resident concerns? I am well within my rights on private HOA property to enforce our community standards. You are the one trespassing in a closed area." Isabel realized then that reasoning with this woman was futile. Dunnigan was cocooned in a dangerous combination of ignorance, arrogance, and a profound misunderstanding of her actual authority. There was no time left for debate. She keyed her comms again, her voice now razor-sharp, radiating an authority that had nothing to do with being a resident of Riverview Towers. FAA Command. This is Administrator Sterling at MSH-1. The helipad is actively deliberately obstructed by an HOA official, Patricia Dunnigan, who is refusing to comply with federal directives to clear. I am declaring this a Code Red aviation security incident. I require immediate Level 1 law enforcement assistance on Riverview Towers, Rooftop 2750, Riverfront Drive. Notify Metro PD Air Support to dispatch their nearest unit for aerial observation and potential rooftop insertion if ground access is delayed. I'm also authorizing an immediate FAA emergency enforcement action against Ms. Dunnigan and the Riverview Towers HOA for willful violation of Title 49 United States Code Section 46308, interference with air navigation, and Section 46306, emergency medical service interference. Inform the U.S. Attorney's Office. We will be seeking maximum penalties. The change in Patricia Dunnigan's demeanor was instantaneous and profound. Her smug certainty faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then dawning horror, as the string of official jargon federal codes and the mention of the U.S. Attorney's Office penetrated her self-righteous bubble. Her eyes widened. The hand clutching the bylaws began to tremble. You can't. She stammered, her voice losing its conviction. This is just an HOA matter. This, Isabel said, stepping closer, her eyes like chips of ice, stopped being just an HOA matter the moment you endangered a human life and interfered with a federally regulated aviation facility, Ms. Dunnigan. You have made a catastrophic misjudgment. She looked around at the heavy furniture. Now, are you going to help me move this, or will you be doing so in handcuffs while explaining your actions to federal agents? The distant, rapidly approaching beat of another helicopter, a deeper, more powerful thrum than the life flights, suddenly became audible, growing louder by the second. Metro PD Air Support. Isabel had just unleashed the full force of the federal government, and it was arriving with authority. Patricia Dunnigan looked up at the sky, then back at Isabel, her face pale in the flashing lights of the circling life flight. The fight seemed to drain out of her. The bylaws slipped from her nerveless fingers and fluttered to the rooftop. I thought, she began, but Isabel cut her off. There's no time for what you thought, Dunnigan. There's only time to fix what you've done. Isabel grabbed the edge of the nearest cast-iron table. Help me. Now. The setup of Isabel Sterling's life had been one of carefully compartmentalized authority. In her professional sphere as FAA Regional Administrator, she commanded immense respect and wielded significant power over the aviation landscape of the entire Southern Pacific region. Her days were filled with high-stakes decisions, complex regulatory oversight, and the constant, unwavering responsibility for the safety of the flying public and the efficiency of the national airspace system. She was known for her sharp intellect, her calm demeanor under pressure, and her encyclopedic knowledge of aviation law. But at home, in the elegant confines of Riverview Towers, she was simply Izzy Sterling, a private citizen who valued her anonymity, her quiet evenings with a good book, and the stunning cityscape views from her balcony. She had chosen Riverview not just for its amenities and location, but because its rooftop helipad serving MedStar General was a point of professional pride, a piece of critical infrastructure operating seamlessly within an urban environment. She'd never imagined it would become a battleground with her own homeowners association. The Riverview Towers HOA, presided over by a retired insurance executive named Harold Bishop, had always been a bit officious, more concerned with maintaining property values through strict aesthetic controls than with fostering a genuine sense of community. Bishop himself was a man who preferred to delegate especially the unpleasant task of enforcement, which had fallen increasingly to committees. Patricia Dunnigan had risen through the HOA ranks with the zeal of a convert. Having retired from a mid-level bureaucratic position where her authority was limited, she seemed to relish the power, however petty, that her HOA roles afforded her. Her election as chair of the Safety and Serenity Committee 6 months prior had been a turning point. Dunnigan interpreted safety as adherence to her rigid set of rules, and serenity as the complete absence of any sound or activity that displeased her personally, particularly after her self-declared bedtime of 9 p.m. The MedStar helipad, operational for over a decade without significant issue, became her bête noire. Despite numerous explanations from the hospital about its critical life-saving function, despite Isabel's own attempts to educate the HOA board on federal preemption regarding air navigation and emergency medical services, Dunnigan had remained intransigent. She'd successfully lobbied Harold Bishop and a cowed, largely uninformed HOA board to pass the rooftop quiet hours protocol, a bylaw Isabel knew was laughably illegal and unenforceable against federally protected flight operations. She had provided them with official FAA guidance documents, legal precedents, even offered to arrange a meeting with FAA legal counsel. All had been ignored or dismissed with condescending remarks about federal overreach into private community affairs. Isabel had been monitoring the situation, preparing for a more formal FAA intervention if the HOA attempted to enforce their illegal curfew. She just never imagined Dunnigan would be so reckless, so dangerously literal in her interpretation as to physically barricade a designated emergency helipad. Now, on the windswept rooftop, with two helicopters in the air, one carrying a dying patient's hope, the other carrying the law, Isabel's two worlds were colliding with the force of a Category 5 hurricane. The time for quiet residency was over. Administrator Sterling was now fully in command. The wail of sirens from the street below joined the throb of the approaching police helicopter. Dunnigan, looking utterly defeated, began to clumsily help Isabel shove a heavy planter aside. It was a token effort, too little too late. The Metro PD helicopter, a Bell 412, arrived with impressive speed, its powerful searchlight pinning Dunnigan and Isabel in a harsh white glare. It didn't land, but hovered expertly off the side of the building, a tactical team visible in the open doorway, ready to fast rope down, if necessary. On Isabel's command via her comms, they held their position, providing overwatch. Seconds later, the fire door to the rooftop burst open, and two uniformed Metro PD officers, followed by two stern-faced individuals in dark suits, whom Isabel recognized as FAA special agents dispatched from her regional office's security division, stormed onto the helipad. Administrator Sterling, one of the FAA agents. Mark Olson barked his eyes, scanning the scene. Site secure. Almost Olson, Isabel replied, gesturing towards the remaining obstructions. Ms. Dunnigan here was just explaining her unique interpretation of HOA bylaws versus federal aviation law. Officers, this is Patricia Dunnigan, the individual responsible for this barricade. She is to be detained pending federal charges. The local police officers moved efficiently to secure Dunnigan, who offered no further resistance, her face ashen. She began to weep silently as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Isabel Olson and the other agent, a younger woman named Chen, attacked the remaining barricades with focused urgency. The cast-iron tables were heavy, the planters awkward. Every muscle in Isabel's body strained, fueled by adrenaline, and the desperate ticking clock relayed by Captain Rostova. Life Flight 77, Kilo, be advised. Pad is almost clear. Isabel panted into her comms. Prepare for immediate landing on my signal. Roger, Administrator, standing by. Fuel is critical. Organ viability window. We're on the ragged edge. One final massive planter remained. Together, the three of them heaved muscles, screaming, and shoved it clear of the landing circle, just as Captain Rostova's voice came again, sharp with finality. Administrator Sterling, we are at bingo fuel. We must land now or divert. This is our last chance. Pad is clear. 77 Kilo, Isabel shouted into the comms. You are cleared to land, MSH-1. I repeat, cleared to land. With a surge of relief that almost buckled her knees, Isabel watched as Life Flight 77, Kilo, its lights flashing, descended swiftly and expertly onto the now unobstructed helipad. The moment its skids touched down, the side door slid open, and a medical team, faces grim with urgency, sprinted out carrying a red and white cooler. They raced towards the rooftop access door that led directly to a dedicated elevator connecting to MedStar's surgical suites. Isabel felt a hand on her arm. It was Agent Olson. Good work, Administrator. That was too close. Way too close. Mark, Isabel agreed, her voice hoarse. She watched the medical team disappear, then turned her attention back to the scene. Patricia Dunnigan was being quietly read her Miranda rights by a police officer. The rooftop was a chaotic mess of displaced furniture, spilled soil, and the lingering scent of jet fuel and fear. Just then, the elevator doors whirred open, and Harold Bishop, the HOA president, still in his silk pajamas and a cashmere robe, emerged, his face a mask of confusion and affront. He was flanked by two other sleepy-looking board members. "What in blazes is going on up here?" Bishop demanded, his voice puffed with indignation. "Who authorized this circus? And why is Mrs. Dunnigan in handcuffs? This is an outrage." Isabel Sterling turned slowly to face him, her expression one of utter glacial authority. The time for diplomacy for resident Izzy Sterling was definitively over. FAA Regional Administrator Sterling was about to lay down the law. "Mr. Bishop?" Isabel began, her voice resonating with the full power of her federal office. "What you are witnessing is the direct consequence of your HOA's reckless disregard for federal law, for public safety, and for basic human decency. Your Safety and Serenity Committee Chair, Ms. Dunnigan, acting under the apparent authority of an illegal bylaw, your board deliberately barricaded this federally designated emergency helipad, obstructing a critical organ transport flight and directly endangering the life of the transplant recipient, not to mention the flight crew." Bishop's jaw dropped. He stared from Isabel to the now departed helicopter, to the weeping Dunnigan, to the armed police officers and federal agents. The cashmere robe suddenly seemed less imposing. A transplant," he stammered. "But the noise curfew. Mrs. Dunnigan was just enforcing the rules." "Your rules?" "Mr. Bishop," Isabel cut him off, her voice like sharpened steel, "are illegal, unenforceable, and have tonight resulted in multiple felony violations of federal aviation statutes. Specifically, Title 49, United States Code, Section 46308, interference with air navigation, which carries penalties of up to 20 years in prison and substantial fines, and Section 46306, willful interference with emergency medical services with similar consequences." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "Ms. Dunnigan is being taken into federal custody, and the Riverview Towers Homeowners Association, Mr. Bishop, is now the subject of an immediate and comprehensive FAA enforcement action. We will be seeking the maximum civil penalties for every minute that flight was delayed, for every regulation your HOA has flouted, and for the establishment of an illegal ordinance that directly threatened public safety and critical national infrastructure. Those penalties, I assure you, will run into the millions of dollars." Harold Bishop swayed slightly, his face draining of color. The other two board members looked horrified. "But we're just a homeowners association," one of them, a woman Isabel vaguely recognized from the finance committee, protested weakly. "We can't afford millions." "Perhaps you should have considered that," Isabel retorted icily, "before you decided your desire for a quiet evening trumped federal law and a human life. My office tried to warn you. You chose not to listen." She turned to Agent Olson. "Mark, please ensure Mr. Bishop and these board members are fully apprised of their legal situation and the impending FAA action. Secure all relevant HOA records pertaining to the helipad, the curfew bylaw, and any communications regarding its enforcement. We will need a complete audit trail." Olson nodded. "Consider it done, Administrator." Isabel then addressed the Metro PD sergeant who was overseeing Dunnigan. "Sergeant, thank you for your department's swift response. Ms. Dunnigan is now officially in federal custody, but we'd appreciate your assistance with processing until the U.S. Marshals can take her. My office will handle all federal charges." The sergeant nodded. "Understood, Administrator Sterling. We'll cooperate fully." The rooftop was gradually clearing. Life Flight 77, Kilo, its mission precariously completed, had already departed for its base. The medical team was by now in surgery at MedStar, fighting to give their patient a second chance at life, a chance Patricia Dunnigan had nearly extinguished. Isabel walked to the edge of the rooftop, the city lights sprawling beneath her like a carpet of scattered diamonds. The cool night air felt good on her flushed face. She was exhausted, shaken, but also filled with a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. What happened here tonight was a symptom of a deeper problem, a dangerous arrogance and ignorance that could not be allowed to stand. She took out her phone and made another call, this time to the director of MedStar General Hospital. She needed to know the outcome of the transplant, and then she needed to begin the long, arduous process of ensuring that no HOA, no petty tyrant like Pat Dunnigan, or complacent enabler like Harold Bishop could ever again hold a human life hostage over a noise complaint. The full weight of the FAA was about to descend on Riverview Towers, and it would be a lesson they would never forget. The climax of the immediate crisis had been the helicopter landing, the organ rushed to surgery, and Dunnigan's arrest. But the true climax of the HOA's reckoning was yet to unfold in sterile meeting rooms and federal courtrooms. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Isabel and her team. Agent Olson spearheaded the on-site investigation at Riverview Towers, meticulously collecting evidence HOA meeting minutes where the illegal curfew was debated and passed emails from Dunnigan, detailing her enforcement plans, internal communications, showing Bishop's awareness and tacit approval. The HOA's records, it turned out, were a damning indictment of their own negligence and overreach. Isabel, meanwhile, coordinated the broader federal response. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District fast-tracked the charges against Patricia Dunnigan. Given the clear evidence and the life-threatening nature of her actions, bail was denied. Dunnigan found herself trading her sensible cardigan and HOA bylaws for an orange jumpsuit and a federal detention center. The FAA's legal department, armed with the evidence gathered by Olson's team and Isabel's first-hand account, began drafting the formal notice of proposed civil penalties against the Riverview Towers HOA. The calculations were complex, factoring in the direct costs incurred by the delayed flight, the potential risk to the organ recipient, the severity of the interference with a federally regulated facility, and the HOA's willful disregard of prior warnings. The preliminary estimate, as Isabel had warned Bishop, was staggering, well into 7 figures. News of the incident and Isabel's role in it, which the FAA, after careful consideration, decided to make public to underscore the seriousness of interfering with aviation safety, hit the city like a bombshell. Local media picked up the story, FAA Chief foils HOA's deadly helipad blockade. Residents of Riverview Towers were mortified, angry, and terrified of the financial repercussions. An emergency HOA meeting was called, not in their usual comfortable lounge, but in a rented community hall, as their own facilities were now part of an active federal investigation. Harold Bishop, looking gaunt and humbled, attempted to address the furious homeowners. He tried to shift the blame entirely to Dunnigan, portraying her as a rogue actor. But Isabel, who attended the meeting not as a resident, but in her official capacity as FAA Regional Administrator, flanked by Agent Olson and 2 FAA attorneys, was not having it. When Bishop finished his stammering apology and blame shifting, Isabel took the floor. Mr. Bishop, residents of Riverview Towers, she began, her voice calm, but carrying undeniable authority. What occurred on your rooftop 3 nights ago was not simply the act of one misguided individual. It was the foreseeable outcome of an HOA board that prioritized misinformed notions of serenity over established federal law, public safety, and basic human compassion. The illegal bylaw your board enacted, despite clear warnings from my office and others about its unenforceability and inherent danger, directly enabled Ms. Dunnigan's reckless actions. She paused, letting her words sink in. The FAA has a zero-tolerance policy for interference with aviation safety and critical medical infrastructure. The penalties your HOA is now facing are severe, yes. They are intended to be. They are intended to send an unmistakable message, not just to Riverview Towers, but to any community organization that believes its internal rules can supersede federal law when lives are on the line. She then outlined the FAA's requirements: immediate and permanent rescission of the illegal quiet hours protocol and any other HOA bylaw that purported to restrict or regulate operations on the MSH-1 helipad. A formal public apology from the HOA to MedStar General Hospital, to Captain Rostova and the Lifelight crew, and to the organ donor's family and the recipient. The development in direct consultation with and subject to the approval of the FAA and MedStar General of a comprehensive helipad operations and safety protocol document to be incorporated into the HOA's governing documents, ensuring unimpeded 24/7 access for all authorized medical flights. Mandatory annual training for all current and future HOA board members and relevant committee chairs on federal aviation regulations, emergency medical service protocols, and the legal limitations of HOA authority conducted by an FAA-approved provider. Payment of the assessed civil penalties, which would be substantial, though Isabel hinted that the FAA might consider a structured payment plan or a partial redirection of funds towards safety enhancements if the HOA demonstrated complete and unequivocal cooperation and reform. The homeowners listened in stunned silence. The sheer scale of their liability, both financial and reputational, was crushing. The anger some had felt towards Isabel for bringing down the feds was replaced by a dawning understanding of how catastrophically their elected leadership had failed them. Harold Bishop and the remaining board members, facing a barrage of furious questions and demands for their resignation from the residents, had no choice but to capitulate completely. Over the next few weeks, the old board was dismantled. Bishop resigned in disgrace. An interim board, composed of more level-headed and responsible residents, was hastily assembled. The falling action began with the slow, arduous process of the HOA, untangling the legal and financial mess its previous leadership had created. Their lawyers entered into negotiations with the FAA, essentially pleading for mercy. Isabel, while unyielding on the core principles of safety and federal authority, was not interested in bankrupting the HOA, which would ultimately punish innocent residents. Her goal was compliance accountability and a permanent solution. A settlement was eventually reached. The HOA agreed to all of the FAA's demands. The civil penalty, while still immense, was structured to include a significant portion dedicated to safety upgrades for the building that would benefit the helipad operations, such as improved lighting, wind shear, detection systems, and direct communication links between the helipad and hospital security. Another portion was directed towards funding public education initiatives on aviation safety and the importance of emergency medical air transport. The punitive financial sting was still sharp enough to ensure the lesson was learned. Patricia Dunnigan's legal fate unfolded in federal court. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including security footage from the rooftop that captured her actions and her defiant statements to Isabel, she eventually pleaded guilty to a felony charge of interference with air navigation. She was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, a sentence that sent a chill through HOAs across the region that might have harbored similar delusions of grandeur. The resolution for Riverview Towers was transformative. Under new leadership, the HOA underwent a profound cultural shift. The obsession with petty rules was replaced by a genuine focus on safety, legal compliance, and responsible governance. The new helipad operations and safety protocol, drafted with Isabel's direct input, became a model for other mixed-use buildings with similar facilities. The mandatory FAA training for board members was eye-opening, instilling a new respect for the complexities of federal law. For Isabel Sterling, life eventually returned to a semblance of normalcy, though she was now a reluctant local celebrity. The resident, who was also the FAA chief. She continued to live at Riverview Towers, a constant visible reminder of the night the HOA almost caused a tragedy. The new board treated her with a mixture of profound respect and healthy trepidation. The most important resolution, however, came in a quiet visit Isabel made to MedStar General a month after the incident. The liver transplant recipient, a middle-aged schoolteacher named Maria Sanchez, no relation to the AAG from the previous story prompt, just a coincidence of naming, was recovering well. Her family, emotional and grateful, thanked Isabel profusely. "You didn't just save her life, Ms. Sterling." Maria's husband said, his eyes filled with tears. "You saved our family." Isabel simply nodded, a lump in her throat. That was the only thanks she needed. That was why she did what she did. The Riverview Towers helipad remained operational, busier than ever, a vital link in the city's emergency medical chain. Sometimes, late at night, Isabel would stand on her balcony and watch the life flight helicopters approach their lights, blinking in the darkness, their rotors a steady, reassuring thrum. No longer a source of contention, but a symbol of hope, a sound of life being saved. The reign of the HOA's illegal curfew was replaced by the paramount, federally protected right-of-way for life itself, and Patricia Dunnigan's orange safety vest was replaced by the sobering reality of a federal prison uniform, a stark reminder that some rules are not meant to be broken, especially when you're unaware that the person you're confronting holds the power to bring the sky down on your head. The community, chastened and reformed, finally understood that true serenity came not from enforced silence, but from the secure knowledge that their home was part of a system that valued life above all else.